Welcome to our in-depth question for today. We have a very interesting topic that we're going to explore, and it is in overcoming information overload. So hang out with us if this is a peak and interest for you. We're going to be going into understanding, like, why do we actually get ourselves in this position where we are feeling overwhelmed and overloaded with information, even to the point that we get stuck. So we're going to cover a few things today. We're going to cover the mechanism of learning. We're also going to have a look at what are the top 5 signs that you are currently in information overload, and the number 1 tip to reduce that dynamic for you. So if this is something of interest for you and you would love the download, then please just put in the word below overload and we will get the download to you. And so if you're watching the replay, just hit replay so we know you are absorbing this information. Hopefully we'll have an outcome for you at the very end. So that is the purpose of this session for today. So welcome. So overwhelm is essentially this dynamic that we feel inundated. It almost it helps us go into this freeze response, where we get stressed and the demands or responsibilities that we have, or the information that we're receiving, it just overwhelms us to a point of inaction, and we can get overwhelmed then and that information overload can affect our mental health. It can affect our business because we're not making decisions and moving forward. It can have an impact on our relationships. So it can have a wide impact on this one dynamic. So what we want to be able to do is, first of all, understand what are the symptoms that we're going to experience that we know that we're currently in overwhelm. Because sometimes people aren't even really aware that they're actually going through overwhelm, or we're getting close to that overwhelm stage. And so part of information overload and overwhelm is going to show up with having a high workload. And so everyone has a different capacity in order to take on all the information. And at different periods of time, if you have a lot of, say, clients, for example, you have a lot of, if you're delivering a course or putting a course together, or you're doing multiple people's courses and you're trying to take in a lot of information, then you can go into information overload. We can also have information overload when we come down to a lack of priorities and unclear priorities. Like, what's the whole point of why you're doing all the learning in the first place? Is it for learning's sake? You're just acquiring more information, kind of like eating and eating and eating and consuming. And then there's no priority, as in what information coming in is worth prioritizing. Is it a time management issue? Like, are you feeling overwhelmed, or is that going through because of not being able to prioritize your time efficiently and effectively? And maybe there's a dynamic around sometimes a financial stress, because sometimes we go, I've paid for course and I want to do it. And then we go through information overload and we feel like we have to keep on learning because we paid for something. And then that financial bind is actually keeping us stuck. So we are going to cover the dynamic really about learning. I'm going to try and do something new. So give me a second if I can actually do it, because I've never done it before. So let me see. So I'm going to go through the first thing, which is the mechanism of learning. And I wonder if can I share my screen? I totally can share my screen. Here we go. New level of learning, team. So I just wanted to go through this mechanism of learning, just so that you can have a deeper understanding of what's actually happening in the learning journey, and then where we get stuck when it comes to information overload. So first of all, we have an input that happens, and that's at the very bottom of the screen here. And so input happens when we are receiving and interpreting information, and we're receiving it you can have it from conversations, from Facebook Lives, we can have it from courses that we do, any digital media dynamic really. And just all our sensory experiences essentially is this input information. So then from there, we have attention. And so this is once the information is received, we're going to put attention is going to determine if we know that we have a reticular activating system inside of our brain, and we're filtering that information. We're going to attune to information that's important to us, and we're going to attend to the information that is most important to us. So this is essentially that component there, where it's like deeming which information is important and which information we're going to kind of bubble up to the surface of what we're going to focus on. So then we have perception. I'm pretty sure I won't have to describe perception too much to you, but it's essentially your or your filter or bias towards the information in the first place. So then once we have that, we then go through something that's called encoding. So encoding is where we encode it into memory. So when we go through that process of moving the information from the external world and we're processing it into our internal world. And so that part is important in our information, overload, because if we struggle with the encoding, then we're going to struggle and feel overwhelmed. So once we've encoded it, then we go into information storage. And so this is where we're going to later retrieve it. So sometimes we have short-term, long-term memory. And so they're going to go into different kind of compartments depending. And so we're going to need to retrieve that information when we need it. And so when it's stored, we're also going to go through the organizations at the top. We're going to have the information being organized and integrated. And so this is where things like sleep is really important, because if we're taking in a lot of information and we know that organization and integration is happening, then we know that sleep, for example, is a part of the process of actually integrating the information that we're learning. I also think that space and time away from learning, when you come back in again, also is helpful. I know what we do at Maximum Growth, we're about micro learning or micro integration. So rather than trying to do it all in one go, in one sitting, and try to get overwhelmed by how much you have to learn, it's like little micro learnings and micro work and micro integration to be able to organize and integrate that information, maybe at a slower pace, but a more long-term integrated space. And then we have retrieval aspect. So this is where you take your memory out and you start retrieving it, and then you put the problem-solving dynamic in and communicating what the things that you've learned. And so that can be, if you struggle to communicate the very things you've learned, it's because one is it hasn't been organized and integrated, and because of the overwhelm, for example. So then we go through processing and analyzing it. So this is where we start to use our cognitive ability to kind of formulate ideas and put that information, critical think, for example, and then use that information in a practical way. The output then is obviously the generated responses that you have for the information that you learned. And so we go through this cycle of, so hopefully it's been helpful to have a visual of that. So we go through this cycle when it comes to learning. And so you can see then that there's certain parts of that process that we're going to have information overwhelm, or that we get almost like stuck. So the input, if we have large amounts of input coming in, I know personally, if I go to the first time I ever did the Demartini method training program, I actually only, we're in the inner circle team, I actually only did 4 days of the first training program, because it was actually information overload for me. It was too much doing the work and working with someone, and too much information. It was just, I was like almost like sensory overwhelm. And so I needed time to like a break and come back and then do it again. And so we can have that when we have a lot of information, and especially when it's conflicting, especially with the work that we do here. And because it's based on universal principles and truth, then it can be really difficult when there's polarizing opposite viewpoints and you're wanting to learn from multiple different people and they're conflicting in what they're teaching. And so that's why it can be really difficult, or you can go into overwhelm because you're like, I don't know who to listen to and I don't know what to do. And so just the quantity can be overwhelming, but also the quality of what you're actually learning is also playing a part in the overwhelm. The other is attention. So attention is where we're, again, putting our attention and focusing. What happens when we have a lot of information coming in, we actually don't even know where to focus because we've lost priority of why we're learning in the first place. So because of that, we get overwhelmed, so it can be important to know why you're learning in the first place, which is what we covered at the class before. And so the next is the processing part of the information where we get overwhelmed. And so this is when you might be familiar with this, where you get stuck in analysis paralysis. This is where the processing of the information is stuck. We might call it that, because you're getting conflicting information, you're trying to understand it, but then you go into the decision paralysis or analysis of paralysis. or the paralysis of analysis, whichever way you want to look at it. And then you go into that freeze response. So as soon as you feel that freeze response in your body, I want you to think of this picture that I just showed you before and go, okay, cool, I'm stuck in one of those right now. Because we tend to have this like huge judgment on ourselves. I shouldn't be doing this, I should know, and I should be moving forward. And it's like, no, we're just kind of like stuck in one of those cogs at the moment. And what do we have to do to kind of shift and change that? So it's just, I want to get you a visual of that experience so that you can have a deeper understanding when you go into that dynamic right now. So what are the signs then that you are in information overload? I just want to give you into short, sharp, succinct ideas for you to start thinking about. So one is the inability to make a decision. So if we have a lot of information coming in, we want to be able to filter that and make a decision, because the reason why you're learning in the first place is to do something with it. It's not to just learn for learning's sake. It's to actually want to do something with it. And so what we want to be able to do is if we feel like we're unable to make a decision, that's one great feedback to say that, hang on, maybe I need to come back, have a priority why I'm learning in the first place, and then it will help with you taking in the information and filtering it from a decision-making process. So the other can be the reason why we go through and experience and signs that we're going through information overload is around lack of concentration. And so, because what happens is when we want to concentrate, you want to focus on the information, but it's not even going in. You might spend 10 minutes trying to read something. You're like, did I even read something? And you have to go back and start again. And then you're like, okay, I'm not even paying attention anymore because my attention is elsewhere. My attention's not on the information. So that's definitely a great sign that you are lack of concentration, that you are not, or you're going through information overload. And the other is difficult sleeping. So there is a ton of reasons why you're going to have a lack of sleeping. But when it comes to information that we're trying to process, it's almost like, I don't know if you've ever felt this way before. I know definitely, having done a lot of John Demartini's courses, and it might be a lot of speaking for a lot of hours in a row, and then it's like, okay, go to sleep, and I'm like, oh no, nothing's happening. My brain is just going a million miles an hour because there was just so much information. And so you can notice then this inability to sleep, or just a lack of sleeping, or a lack of ability to sleep, is because that heightened amount of information that has been you've been added to you. And so it's almost like you're too alert. And you're like, okay, now what do I do with all of this? Because we need to, if we go back to that diagram I showed you, we still need to encode it. We need to store it. There needs to be organization and integration, and your brain's still trying to catch up with that. And which is why it's alert and awake. So definitely something to think about. And the two more to go is we have a tendency to, because creativity comes from space. So if we want to be creative, we have to create this space, the head space, the heart space, the mind space, in order to be creative. And so, because it's almost like creativity kind of almost sometimes like kind of comes through you, if it feels like that. And so what can happen is that when we almost feel blocked with our creativity when we're in information overload. And so if we want to create a new course, or we want to have a new idea for how to serve clients, it's a bit hard when you're kind of full. It's like really, 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 really full. And then you're like, okay, now I've got to come up with a new idea. It's like, I'm too full. It's almost like you've got to empty before you can actually come up with a new level of creativity. And so, of course, then part of all of that dynamic is you're going to reduce your actual memory capacity, because if we go back to attention, you're too focused on all the other information. So what we want to be able to do is, as we dissolve our information overload, we'll also increase your memory. So if you've wondered why potentially you're struggling with memory and struggling to remember things, it can be because there's just too much information coming in, and then therefore you're struggling with memory. So what then is the number one tip to reduce your information overload? So, I mean, there's lots of things that you could potentially do, but I would potentially think about if you've got the 7 areas of life, and you think about all the potential people that you value in different areas of life, who would be someone that you could learn from each of the areas of life, and just follow fewer people rather than the many. and then do that for a period of time, and then follow someone, like do a journey with people. So that would be what I would do in terms of reducing your information overload. Also have, I know this, I said one tip, but I can't help it. Let me just give you one more. You got to have a purpose. So you got to have a reason why you're doing all of this learning in the first place. It is something we explored in our session that we had previously. But we have to come back to, like, why is it that you want to learn? When we explored in unlocking your ROI potential, all that learning and turning the learning into earning. Why are you learning in the first place? If you want to get an ROI, but you don't know why you're learning in the first place, pretty hard to go and ask that question. Then the same thing, if you are information and taking all and consuming all this information and you want to dissolve this dynamic, well, why are you learning in the first place? So if you can uncover that, it will make a profound difference in terms of shifting this dynamic. So hopefully you found today really interesting or insightful for you. You got a lesson in learning. If you have, just write it in below. If you're watching the replay, then you can put it in the comments section underneath. You can also have the download. If you want the download, write in over, what do we do? Overload is our word for today. So we are in the next session, and I just want to kind of pre-frame where we're going so that you can, consider what we're the next session, because part of overwhelm also comes with a lack of boundaries. And so what we're going to explore in our next session is going to be around no more yeses, and how to put more boundaries in place that you can feel like you can say more yes to you and less or no, and more no to the outside world and more yes to you. So stay tuned for that. So thank you so much for coming along for our in-depth question. If you love this, finding it interesting, insightful, please comment below. I look forward to hearing your responses. So thank you, team, and I look forward to seeing you at the next perfect time.